Good afternoon, Molweni. My name is Luvuyo Madasa, and I'll be your host this afternoon for our installation of Indoda. When is it all too much is today's conversations. Thank you for everyone who's joined us on Facebook Live. And as mentioned, today's engagement of Indoda is brought to you in a collaboration between the Mental Wellness Initiative and the Ford Foundation. Today's discussion is going to be hosted amongst what I'd like to say are four elder brothers. I've asked for us in today's engagement to keep the conversation as natural and as accessible as possible, given that today's topic is a very big one that all of us grapple with in one way or another. And what we will be leaning on during today's discussion is more of our experience in the fields that we happen to work in, but most importantly, tapping into and being present in our identity as men, the people that we show up every single day in our families and also in our homes, in our communities and the organizations that we happen to work in, and how that adds to the topic that we're discussing today. So I'm just going to, for the sake of setting the tone and the foundation, do a little bit of reading just to help set that tone before introducing our guests. So the purpose of the live show today is to provide an open platform for candid conversations about the mental health state and the mental health issues for men from a trauma-informed perspective. The topics of the show, Indoda, and the topics that will follow are informed and deliberately selected so as to bring awareness of the systemic contributions of concern of mental health issues and the status that men deal with. For far too long, we've been firefighting symptomatic problems that are stemmed from a deeply entrenched and deliberately cultivated and socially engineered problems that predate our time and have evolved and infiltrated the lowest levels of our societies. These conversations are an attempt to not only bring awareness, but a realization that we are riding off of a system that has and will continue to gravely harm the fabric of society if not dealt with. The solutions are inevitably embedded in the very system that governs our ecosystem, and we need to unpack and reassemble it in ways that work for the betterment of our society. And today's conversation is an effort to help us achieve that. It's a given. Life comes with challenges, and we all go through these challenges. But what enables others to go through these challenges and succeed? Some go through them and seem to fail, yet some feel the only way out is to end it all. And today's discussion is about that very difficult challenge, the heightened rate at which men take their lives in South Africa. South Africa currently sits in a record high as the second highest of all male suicides. In a world of over 4 billion men and about 200 countries, there is no denying that this is not only a pandemic, but an indication that there is a serious mental crisis within our society. And many of us as men deal with identities that we have not chosen. We inherited them. So more specifically, as men and Africans living in Africa battle with our identities in the many spaces that we move through and in the many environments that we are asked to lead in. I am joined today by our guests, Mr. Jeff Jacobs, Martin Peldes, Errol Pillay, and Ndadesake Kenosi, along with Lloyd Manganani, to have our discussion today. Gentlemen, if you could just please chime in, and I'll start with you, Errol. If you could just do a brief intro, who you are and what you hope to get from this conversation today.
Thanks, Luvuyo. So as Luvuyo has indicated, my name is Errol Pillay, and I like the way you've positioned it. Many years ago, I made a decision. I'm Errol Pillay, who happens to work somewhere or do something. So I am then this husband, father of two not so young ladies anymore, but also find myself in an environment that I think have been called to a service in community, to young people. So this is where I find my joy and my expression. That has led me into a career of human resources management, and over the last 10 odd years in serving young people in youth skills development. So really grappling with how that transition happens into the workplace. But obviously that cannot happen in isolation. There's a full being that needs to transition. It's not just necessarily these skills. And it's a question that often comes up for me. So I'm hoping that in this conversation we could explore some of that dimension of it. These young men specifically that are making that transition. But also, what is that responsibility? Because again, it's not something that stands in isolation, because there are other men that are not so young that are the archetypes that they reflect on, that they refer to. So it's a broader topic, but that's the dimension that I am keenly interested in. So hoping that we will touch on that and contribute from that dimension. Also, from my personal experience, hopefully there's some exchange that I can give and receive in this afternoon. So thanks, Luvuyo. Thanks for this opportunity from MWI to create these important conversations.
Thank you for that introduction, Harold. Jeff, over to you.
Thanks very much, Luvuyo, and welcome to our conversation this afternoon. I'm one of the older guys that Errol referred to in his introduction. I'm not sure if I'm the oldest here, but let me give you a brief background on myself. My wife and I have been married now for 40 years. We celebrated that this year. I've got 2 adult kids, just under 40, sort of mid-30s and just under 40, and 1 grandson of 2.5 who gives me great joy. And so I come into this conversation conscious of the fact that I have a responsibility to create a legacy for my children and my grandkid, just the one that we have at the moment. I'm a director of the Mental Wellness Initiative. I'm an ex-teacher, so schooling is in my blood. I'm an ex-HR director of Maersk, the shipping company, and currently run my own HR consultancy. So I bring into the conversation an aspect around human resources, around organizations and leadership. I'm particularly interested in how leadership shows up in our country, and we'll talk a little bit about that through the course of the conversation. I'm delighted to be part of this engagement today. Thank you. Thanks, Luvuyo.
Thank you very much for that intro, Jeff. And I'm still working alphabetical order, and I hope I got my ABCs right. So I'm handing over to you, Lloyd.
Okay, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. So my name is Lloyd Magangeni. I'm involved in global education. And as a human behavior specialist, I have charted this course because I have seen that there was a space, there was a need that was required, and there was a lot of things happening, especially when as far as the human behavior is concerned, because it's the driving force of our community. So yeah, so I'm an author, speaker. I travel. I love to travel the world and put my foot on each and every country, because I believe that I've been called into this space, into the universe to make a difference. So education is something that I love, and if we don't, then if we don't address something that really drives people, because I believe human behavior, like in this incident for today, what we're going to be talking about, I believe that they are the anchor of what drives a human being. There are things that human behavior is something that is behind all the success and the failures in the world. So thank you very much for having me this moment in time, and I'd love to be part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Lloyd. And now over to you, Martin. Are you good to go?
Thanks, Luvuyo. I think is it unmuted? Can you hear me?
All good. Please go ahead.
No, you're muted at the moment.
You've accidentally muted yourself now. Can you unmute and then?
It's weird. It's not.
We seem to have momentarily lost Martin. Maybe just some challenges with connectivity. And Datesake, if I can ask you to then join with an introduction of yourself and what you hope to get from today's conversation.
Thank you very much. Really, I thank you for the opportunity. My name is Kiki Nospoke. I'm the founder of an organization called Panabakai, which means where are the men. I'm a married man. I'm celebrating my 80th anniversary for September next week. And I'm also the chairperson of Men's Sector in Northwest Province. I am so happy to be in this place because the vision of the organization that I started is very clear. That our mission is to restore the position of men as a father to his children, as a husband to his wife, and also as a leader in the community, which is the last part of our vision, which is very important, based also on what we're going to engage with. And for me, as I've dedicated my life for being an activist in change, I think this is a platform where I can share my experience, where also I can narrate experience that I've gained from working with men, as I'm an activist who's working hard to make sure that men restore their position. It's a privilege for me because we are challenged by this injured mind of men, which today we need to help this mind, which will help it so that men can restore their positions, so that men can bring a change into this decaying community that we are involved with. So thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Lovely.
Thank you very much, Ntatesake. And just for your awareness, we just had a bit of challenge with your connectivity. So I've just asked for the technical team to turn your camera off, which has allowed for your audio to come a lot clearer. So please just be aware that we've turned off your camera, but I think everyone has joined in for what you have to say. So I don't think that will be much of an issue going on in the program. Martin, maybe second time round lucky.
Yeah, let's hope
over to you for your intro.
Let's hope it's not a third time. I'm Martin, founder of an organization called Matrix Men, which is kind of born out of a necessity to create a space to deal with things that I've been through as a child. So I'm a survivor of sexual abuse and rape and abuse. And it was for me important to start an organization to do that, just create a safe space to talk about the stuff that we don't like talking about. I'm also a father, grandfather, also one grandson. Great joy, hopefully, as Jeff said, more to come. And I like to approach this topic, which to me is fascinating because we like to talk about, we like to genderize everything in society. So we like talking about the murders of one specific gender. And although that is important, we kind of miss the point that in that same period, more men took their own lives. And we're not talking to that. So we need to create spaces where we can open up this conversation and not always turn it into this gender war. We need to be sensitive to the plight of all people. And it's my firm belief that a lot of this is entrenched in childhood trauma. And that's kind of the perspective that I like to come from today, is to get men to open up and to talk about that childhood trauma that they just don't want to talk about, or perceived as normal, perceived it as, well, that happened to everybody. And, to kind of create a space and an awareness as to what happened to men who've suffered tremendous trauma as children, which equates to probably about 45% of our population at this stage in this country. So yeah, that's where I'm coming at this whole thing from, and looking forward to the opportunity and to be with such great minds. What a pleasure. Thanks, Louis.
Thank you, gents, and I appreciate those introductions. And then for myself, as I said, my name is Luveo Matasa. I wear many hats on most days, but most recently I have earned the proud hat of being father to two young twin boys. So that is one of those hats that I now need to wear, need to grapple with, make sense of. You know, how do you show up and be a father to young men in the context of the labels that are given to men? To Martin's point, we have a scourge of gender-based violence, but to the point of this discussion, within the same period of time, you have a heightened number of men taking their own lives based on the various different pressures that they come across. And maybe that's where we can start the conversation. And I'd like to open the door over to Errol to maybe speak to the work that you do engaging with the young men who are coming into the world of work. What do you experience as the majority of those pressures that seem top of mind? You know, easing people into the world of work out of either being unemployed or going through the various different programs that you offer in your space. What could you say is part of that pressure that you experience, and help in the opportunities you make available, try help them overcome?
Yeah, thanks, Luveo. I think for me that what is very real is and when you read through material, you'll see that a great impact on this heightened level of suicide that we are experiencing comes from unemployment being a high factor of that. So condition in the environment, condition in the economy, and what goes with it is a sense of a lack of self-worth as young people come into it. I always find it interesting is that people want to know what you do as soon as they meet you. So what work do you do? So it becomes a very interesting question. So that level of anxiety is a great pressure because there's so much, again, another construct of our society works is another construct of identity is your work. So I can never be fully Errol until I'm employed, you know, or until I've got a job, and then it becomes a title, and then it becomes a degree or whatever it might be. So I see a lot of that pressure coming in, and I think coupling that with the reality of South Africa of this heightened unemployment, so it's real. It's not a stat that lives very far out from the communities these young people are coming from. So what we're finding, and I think what I'm observing more is that there's a great need because there's so much focus just on providing the job and the solution around career. So you would have many acts being written. There was lots of structures around transformation, but it often forgets this person and where they come from. So I think I think Martin quoted this: 45% of people come traumatized, but we never deal with that. So what I'm seeing is that a lot of these young men, young people, but young men specifically, come in with this trauma, never dealt with, and they take that on their journey. So I grapple with, and I've not done enough work and could probably do much more with how do we receive those young people? What is that transition we need to make in order to create this view of the world that is broader than just a one-dimensional view of, if you find this job, you will be happy. It will resolve all your childhood trauma. It will address all these needs. It is greater than that. So I think that has been my experience around young people entering the world of work.
Thank you, Errol. And just to prompt you, Lloyd, I'll be coming over to you. Errol spoke of identity. The conversation starts with the importance of having a job. You know, I'm not Errol Pillay until I have a job and people know what it is that I do. And you were speaking about the behavioral psychology and how those pressures may necessarily influence how people show up in their various different spaces. Anything that you could add to that?
Okay, thank you very much for that. And thank you, Errol, for raising that. He raised the issue that is very important. And I've also indicated in one of my books called, like it talks about the identity. And identity is very important. And he mentioned the issue of whenever someone comes on board and you come, like when we meet in a social setup, we always ask what we do and all that. The problem that we have and the societal issues that I can really raise right now, it's an issue of we have failed to identify who we are as to for who we are. We have now associated who we are and what we do. Because if somebody were to ask you what you do, and then you mention things like, okay, you've got a certain degree and so forth, but that's not exactly who you are. That's what you have. That's what you've acquired, which is something that someone can acquire at any time. Most of the time when I engage with people in different setups, I don't like to raise what I've acquired. I don't just talk about the PhDs, the masters and so forth, what I've done and so forth. I talk from a perspective of an ordinary person who's an ordinary citizen. Because if I were to ask you who you are and you tell me that you're a business person, then clearly you don't know who you are. You are telling me what you do. And at the same time, there is also, if you say I'm a father, or like mainly, who you are, and then you tell me like I'm a father and all that, you are telling me something that is important to you, because that's exactly a priority that is important to you, but that's not exactly who you are. Because these are things, when you come into the world, you come into the world as a person, right? You come into the world, it comes from different ways. You're a creature, it's different in science and in different beliefs. They define a person as you're a human being. That's exactly what you are. But when it comes to the issues like when you say you're my father, that's what you do. You do fatherhood. When you say I'm an accountant, I'm an engineer, I'm a psychologist, that's what you do. That's not exactly who you are. So what is wrong within our society is the presentation. I think it's the way how we have built a certain culture. We have so those are things that at the end of the day, when it comes to identity, because identity is already defined in those spheres. So the problem that will happen is that whoever decide to enter into that association has to be defined in a certain way, has to be defined according to what is acceptable in that society, in that community. You can easily see it in different spheres. When a man goes to meet with academics, they define themselves from that perspective. If you happen to not to have that qualification that those have, there is a stereotype. People start projecting certain things upon you because now you are in the sphere. Like, for example, if you meet a group of psychologists and you are not a psychologist, the atmosphere changes, because now not say you accept, and the atmosphere surrounds the energy will actually tell you that you're not acceptable in that manner. There is no someone who steps out of that and then just define men as men, because I think I'll say this is important for me just to add on what you said. It's an element of a character difference. There is a character difference between a man and a woman. We're different. Science proved it. In many levels, there's been proved. There's a character difference. There's a way how men are. There is what drives men, which is far different from what drives women. So sometimes it's a problem of perception, because we perceive, if you perceive a man the way how you perceive a woman, then we have a problem, because men are different. They need to be defined within the confines of a man. And for you to do that, to be able to do that, you need not to have a pseudo thinking or a subjective theories that you might have that will you define men within the confine of your beliefs. So all those things, some men are it's because of what we are going to say. It's because of what we're going to say about that particular man. Like, I just want to take this point home, right? So I think we all as men contribute to the suicide and all that happens. It's not just them, but it's sometimes what we do that contributes to that. So I just want to leave it there for now, but we'll come.
So thank you for that point. And I think if I was to summarize your contribution, I think you're adding still to the reality of labels that are given, of an importance of navigating through different spaces in society, the importance of engaging and being on par with peers. But again, these are all either outward coming in identities. But Martin, you actually touched on something that is about a trauma that maybe an individual carries. You speak to a very specific childhood trauma that you have had to carry and make sense of and live with in terms of as you've gone through your journey through life. If you could touch a bit more around that in terms of not only what you've what you shared in your introduction, but the different groupings of men, young, old, middle-aged, that deal with some of those other inward pressures of things that they carry with them and don't easily offer an opportunity to be put on the table and engaged with and find a community that understands that.
Yeah, thanks, Luvuyo. How many hours are you giving me to answer that?
Just, if you give it about 2 or 3 minutes, we'll continue weaving it into the conversation.
Okay. I just want to pick on a point that Errol raised. He says, like, you know, your identity is not your job. Your identity is not your home. Your identity is not the fact that you're married or a father. And this is societal pressure that's been put on people. You know, I lived my life going like, I'm broken. I didn't realize I was broken, right? So you live your life going like something wrong, but society tells me that if I buy the house and the 2 cars and I have the white picket fence, the 2 children, the dogs, the microwave and the TV, then I'll be happy. And that's not true. You know, it's not true. True happiness comes from dealing with your trauma, dealing with your past. And I think something that Lloyd raised as well. Sorry, I lost that point. Part of the Alzheimer's disease. Anyway, so getting back, you know, talking about trauma. I mean, I went through life thinking that my life was normal. The fact that I was being sexually abused and raped, the fact that I was being beaten at home, the fact that I was being mentally manipulated, emotionally manipulated. It was supposedly normal because we don't talk about these things. We're men, you know, there's a pressure put on us to be masculine men, you know, and people get really offended when I say this. You know, we need to address this thing called toxic masculinity. And this is what it brings into our lives, because society told me that I, as a man or as a boy, could not be a victim of rape. Society told me that when I was 12 and a 25-year-old woman slept with me, I was supposedly lucky, you know, and society tells me that I'm sexually driven. Society tells me that because I'm a man, that's all I want. I want sex, and I'm driven that way. And all I'm looking for is a physical connection, not an emotional connection. And these are the things that we need to address. And if we don't start creating spaces where men can come up, talk about these things, we're going to have a lot of damaged, broken men out there. You know, the stats in South Africa are that I think it's 36.8% of all boys have been sexually abused by the age of 18, and 33.9% of all girls are sexually abused by the age of 18, age of 16. Sorry, and so you can see just purely from that research that more boys are being impacted by sexual abuse than girls. But we're not talking about the fact that, you know, woman is a perpetrator. You know, it's kind of this perception that the man is always the guilty party. You know, we need to break these constructs. We need to start opening up and giving people permission to heal. That's essentially what it is. You know, for me, walking into a rape crisis center when I was a 16-year-old boy and looking at all the posters on the walls, and they were all depicting women as victims or girls as victims and men as the perpetrators, I looked at that and couldn't process. I wasn't emotionally mature enough to be able to process the fact that it could have been me as a little boy, but that picture that it's only girls is there, and it's prevalent, and it's keeping a lot of boys trapped, and it's keeping a lot of girls trapped because they don't think they can be abused by women. So we need to be more open and concise about who is a perpetrator, who a victim is, and that sort of thing. And just to end off this point, I was reading some research the other day where in Canada they've come up and they've said that 53% of all the men that have committed suicide in the last year, and I can't remember the period that they studied, had been victims of female perpetrated rape as children. 53%, that's a hell of a high percentage. And I'm thinking in Canada, the figures aren't as high as ours, but pretty much boils down to the same thing. More men are taking their lives because they're more violent. There's actually more women who attempt suicide but don't succeed. But there's a fewer men who do it and actually succeed. So there we go. Men are 5 times more likely to die by suicide than women. Because we're just physically stronger and we're more capable of being able to take our lives violently. It's just ridiculous. I mean, I'm a survivor of 5 suicide attempts. So yeah, there's so much to unpack in this space, and 90 minutes is not going to crack it, but it's a start. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the contribution, Martin. To all of those that are currently on Facebook Live, thank you very much. Laura, Boatle, we do see your questions coming in. The second part of this engagement will be fielding in a lot more of the questions that are coming in from the Facebook Live. So please do keep those coming. The technical team is sharing them with us. We have just essentially starting off with an internal discussion and then bringing over the engagements on the live platform. Martin spoke about creating safe spaces where people can show up and in essence start dealing with the issues that they confront, carry with them on a day-to-day basis, and are trying to make sense of as they journey through life. Ntate, this speaks to some of the work that you're doing. So I'd like to use this as an opportunity to bring you into the conversation, and maybe you could touch on some of that work that you're doing with Bana Bakai.
Thank you. Yes, we found it very important that we need to create a safe space for men, and for the engagement of men's sector, and with the participation of Department of Social Development, with the leadership of the Deputy President, Rieta Zulu Bahopan, we managed as a sector to build 6 centers in Northwest, and nationally, I think the 17 spaces centers built, which are called men's launch. Those are the spaces that we have created so that men can come together, share together, and also advise each other. So those safe spaces, which are called men's launch, they are provided with the services of a social worker, a male social worker, an administrator, and also victim support workers. That is what we have done as men's sector in this country with the partnership of social development. And what is important also, we have built a shelter, temporary shelter for men. As a shelter, because sometimes you find that there is a domestic issue and a man supposed to leave his house and he has to get a place where he can stay. So we created this because it is very important for the mental health or the welfare of a man. So that man, he can be brought by the police to us, and we take care of him, we help him. We also do interventions in terms of sessions to help him. He can stay with us for a week. We provide him with breakfast, lunch, and supper. While some interventions are done with the family. Lovuno, it is very important because men, when they are challenged by problems in the house, they need a place where they can say, let me go and have some space and meet other men, because these safe places, they are well finished. They've got everything where they can have tea, where they can have, they can watch TV, where they can relax. There's a lounge also there. So everything is available in those safe spaces. So this was a need for the sake of the challenges that we have realized in terms of suicide and in terms also of gender-based violence, where you find that a man decides to kill children and the wife, and he kills himself. So I think we need to focus also. I just want to come also on this issue of identity. An identity of a man is very important, which must always be combined with the purpose. It is very important as a man, you must know what is your purpose. And identity of a man, it's so important that from my experience, I think, I don't know if it's Martin or someone mentioned about happiness. From my experience as I'm working with men, I got a doctor here by profession who was challenged mentally because he doesn't know his identity. And his identity, he feels culturally, he doesn't know his father. He wants to know his father. He's got everything. He's learned, he's qualified, he's got money, he's got everything, but he does not know his father. And he feels that he doesn't have an identity culturally where he can belong. And it was our job to make sure that at the end of the day, we help him. And we managed to trace his father. And as I'm talking now, that man has got happiness in his life. Thank you, Lovino. That's what I can contribute.
Thank you very much, Ntatisaki. And I think all of us have dealt with very interesting and very important components of all these pressures that are leading to many men in South Africa taking their own lives. I must say, having personally benefited from a MWI, mental wellness initiative experience, where they recently ran a pilot of which I was a beneficiary to, or beneficiary of rather, where we were dealing with everything from trying to keep organizations alive post-COVID, trying to deal with the reality of leading organizations in an ambiguous environment, both in the business environment and also just in society by and large. And I'd like to bring Jeff in as a leader of that initiative, just to touch on some of the work and engagements that he's had over the past months, given that work. Jeff?
Thanks very much, Luvuyo, and thanks to the other panelists for the points that have been made. I want to make a couple of comments, if I may, and touch on the Mental Wellness Initiative, MWI, perspective on things. We were formed in the heart of COVID. And so we must never forget that this conversation happens within the context of what was really quite a traumatic period for the world and for South Africa. And I'm glad that Martin brought up the issue of trauma, because we think that that's quite an important perspective that we've got to bring into our conversations. We're not operating in a normal world. We're operating in a country, particularly the country of South Africa, where trauma shows up in significant ways. It's historical, the trauma, the history of our country going way back. Some of you don't, some of you know this, some of you don't. My initial training was as an historian. And so I was very interested in what has happened in our country's past. And I think the fact that we were able to transition from an apartheid regime to a country that was liberated without significant bloodshed. Yes, there were sacrifices were made, but without significant bloodshed, has kind of left us believing that everything's okay. Well, the reality is things are not okay. The past shows up in our present. The past impacts the way we show up. And so the trauma-informed perspective for us is very important. It's collective. As a nation, we suffered under the apartheid regime, and we mustn't forget that in the way in which we try and transform, try and change, try and heal from that. So that's the first point that MWI wanted to make very strongly when we established our organization. The second point is how we view organizations and how we view leadership. So you were a beneficiary of our first program, the Leading for Healing program, and we chose that name deliberately because we argued the point that organizations generally in South Africa are toxic. I want to make that point and almost be bold about saying that. The organizations are led largely in a top-down, dictatorial, dominating manner, and many of our organizations are led with a very strong, the masculine toxicity that Martin speaks about. And so if we're going to create safe spaces, we've got to create safe spaces in our organizations. That's our foundational point. We've got to get into our organizations. We've got to work with leadership. We've got to create leadership that's more trauma-informed, more trauma-sensitive. We've got to create leadership that's more emotionally in tune with themselves. And so, Luvio, the program that we ran starts off with a leading self. Unless you know how to lead yourself, unless you recognize how you show up as a leader, unless you recognize how you come across, how you impact people as a leader, you're not going to be able to create a safe space where people have that sense of identity and the sense of belonging that folk have been speaking about. So from the MWI perspective, what's very important for us is how we impact society by creating organizations that are more emotionally in tune, organizations that are trauma-informed, organizations that have leadership that show up with emotional intelligence. So that for me is a very important theme. So we need to rediscover our humanity. South Africa gave the world the term Ubuntu. And if we look at what's happening around us today, it doesn't seem as if Ubuntu is a very strong quality in our society and a very strong quality in our organizations. And how this impacts people. And I know I'm shifting the conversation away from men, but how this impacts people. They find themselves in organizations which are not safe spaces for them to show up in. So that's the contribution I want to bring into the conversation, Luvio. How do we, as leaders, step up and build organizations which are more emotional, more emotionally intelligent organizations? And how do we as leaders recognize that it's not up to the individual, the heroic leader paradigm that we all buy into, but leadership sits in the entire organization. So how do we create a gentler South Africa, a more affirming South Africa, so that we begin to start the healing process in our country? Thanks, Luvio.
Thanks, Jeff. And I'm almost going to rope you back in. You use the term trauma-informed. You also speak to leadership in organizations. And I think in part the conversation is about, yes, in organizations, but also in our homes and in all the different spaces that we move in. So I'm going to throw it back at you and use it as an opportunity to now bring in a question from Sekhametse, who has asked, why do men struggle to speak about their trauma? That's the question that she's asked from her side. And I think if you can also, in your response, touch on some of the tools that as we go through the program, it hopes to equip the participants.
It's a great question, Sekhametse. Thanks very much for that. And I think there are no simple answers to these problems that we're talking about here this afternoon. But a simple answer that I want to put on the table is because we've been socialized into thinking we must have all the answers. We've been socialized into believing that men have got to be strong. We've got to show up strong. And the way in which leadership in organizations is designed, it's always a strong, heroic male that runs the organization. We hero worship that kind of leader. But that's how society expects us to show up. When there's challenges, when there are burdens, we expected to carry the burdens of society on our shoulders. And if we're going to speak about the fact that we're struggling, that's going to be a sign of weakness. And that's why we won't go there. We won't talk about it. And I think that why we're seeing the numbers showing up the way they are is because there's a stigma attached to people acknowledging I'm struggling. There's a mental health issue that I have. We're quite happy to talk about physical illness, but we're very scared about talking about mental health issues. And so for me, the simple answer is we don't want people to think that we're weak, and therefore we won't talk about the struggle we're going through. So when I joined the Mental Wellness Initiative, MWI had this, we start our meetings with a check-in, and they expect you to talk about what's going on inside of you. And I must be honest and say, I struggled with that. I really did. Because I've never been taught how to tap into the emotional side of things. I operate up here in my head. I can figure things out intellectually. I can conceptualize things. But to tap into the emotions, very difficult. And I think many men struggle with that. But we need to shift that paradigm. We need to shift that mindset and say it's okay to talk about what's going on in your life.
Thank you, Jeff. And I'd like to take this opportunity to bring in Bontle's share. It's more of a share than a question, and use it as a segue to Laura's question. But from Bontle, she says, I want to acknowledge the childhood trauma that a lot of men have experienced in their lives that goes unresolved until adulthood. And I think, thank you for that, because that's a very important component to acknowledge with everything that we are challenged by and grapple with. And in part of dealing with things that we grapple with, the question from Laura is, how much do you think your culture affects your ability to face and heal from past trauma? There appears to be many taboo subjects within several of South Africa's cultures. I'd like to invite Martin to take a jab at that, and then of course open to the floor.
Yeah, culture is I've noticed in my groups, I mean, what we deal with, the funny thing is that speaking to the first statement that men and adult trauma and that sort of stuff, the average age for a man to come forward is in their 40s, in their mid-40s. And so they suffer. And I think there was a study done in the UK where they said the average period it takes for a man to speak about his abuse is 23.5 years from when it last happened. Now you can imagine my abuse stopped when I was 19. So add 23 years onto that. It's a long time to live with it. And what I say is that men are given the big five. We're not given the emotional skills to be able to deal, like Jeff just said, he finds it difficult to tap into his emotions, all right? Whereas girls, I mean, in groups, I often ask the guys, I say to them, listen, give me some words for emotions, and they'll give me about 8 on average. If I go to a lady and say, listen, give me words for emotions, I'll be sitting here next week. They'll still be rattling off different emotions, So men just aren't given the emotional skills, the emotional maturity, ability to talk about these things. And it takes what we call the midlife crisis to finally get to a point where the guy goes, okay, I can't carry on like this anymore. And eventually they will then start, hopefully we'll start talking out about this sort of thing. How does culture impact? I noticed very, very, very vividly the cultural aspect in my groups around the country. So a lot of the main sort of segment of my groups are Afrikaans males, white males, weirdly enough, and kind of looking back in history and going, okay, why is it that I have the majority of the men in my groups are Afrikaans white males? And I need to look at it and say, well, I think coming from apartheid, they've kind of realized their issues and are brave enough to say we need to change. So they're tackling this sort of stage of their life quite openly. The next one would be white English speakers. Then I would have to say that blacks would be the next culture that is represented quite strongly. And where we struggle there is the colored community. I don't have one colored person, or what we call colored. I hate these labels. Anyway, I'll come to a point now. And the Indian community. So I have a very, very small representation from the Indian community. And culturally, I think I discovered with one of our colored friends, and I said to him, why is it that coloreds don't like talking about things? He says, because we're such a close-knit community that if I go to one of your groups, my whole community is going to know about it. And then they're all going to be mocking me and going like, oh, are you one of those guys? You know, you were raped, whatever. And they find it incredibly difficult to break that barrier and actually come forward and talk about these things. The coloreds that I do know that are talking out about it have been shunned by their communities in a huge way. And that is aside, so that those are the pressures, community pressures that are placed on men. Let's not talk about, you know, Zulu men are warriors, you know, we have a shield and a spear and that's what we do, you know, we're fighters. We don't talk about this stuff. A lot of the Black community have this, well, this, you know, this therapy thing it's a Western problem, you know, we don't have that issue. So there's a lot of cultural impact, but it's difficult for me because I realized one of the first guys I counseled was a young man from Soweto when I started 12 years ago. And he came to my home in Northcliffe when I lived there. It was the bad side of Northcliffe, to say. And he sat down in my house and he started telling me for 2 hours, this guy just did not stop speaking. And I realized one thing then, being an older guy, having done my 2 years military service and being indoctrinated by the apartheid system and all that sort of stuff, it was incredible for me to sit down and listen to a young man from Soweto, telling my story, how it impacted him, how it impacted on his self-esteem, how it messed up his ability to start his own business. And it was just for me incredulous in that we are all the same. It impacts us all the same. So there are these cultural pressures in how we have to approach it, but the impact on all of us is exactly the same. The pain we feel is the same. You know, the rejection, you know, all those things, it's the same. You know, we need to, in a broad sense, kind of start breaking down these racial as well as these gender constructs that we've all, you know, these gender biases. It's all like all men are sexually driven, but there's another gender bias that says all women are nurturing, which is also not true. No, not all women want to have children and be mothers. It's just not. But there's a pressure that's placed onto them that you have to conform with what society wants you to do. So there are these cultural impacts and these cultural pressures, and there's also gender pressures on having to conform to gender norms and that sort of thing. There's so much pressure. It seems that society just wants to kind of squish everybody into a little box. And if you don't fit in that box, well, then you don't fit in our society and you're like an outcast, you know. And we need to start breaking and ripping those boxes open and saying, listen, you know, everybody's entitled to feel, everybody's entitled to feel pain, feel joy, feel whatever. So yeah, and talking to what Jeff was talking about, we are historically, I just want to answer something that Jeff raised. We are historically a very violent nation. You know, whether we had a peaceful transition or not. And this was made incredibly real to me when a friend of mine took me to the Labour Museum at the bottom end of Joburg. And I was walking through there, and there were two incredibly vivid pictures that struck me. The one was a tree in the middle of this compound that was where these laborers were kind of forced to live at night. You know, that's where they slept. And there was this tree, and they called it the slave tree, the punishment tree. And what would happen is people that didn't conform to what their jailers made them do were then chained onto that tree for the night, and they had to sleep under the tree. And I was there with this guy who was a bodybuilder, man. This guy had muscles as big as my thighs, you know. And he was standing there and he was holding on this tree and he was looking, and there was a tear in his eye, and I could see that he was kind of connecting to the ancestors. You know, and the pain, this man, this brave strong man chained like a dog to this tree. And I could see that connection. And I thought, wow, we have this incredible pain, you know, that we've grown up. But the thing that impacted me the most was when I read a statement by somebody, I wish I could remember his name, that says, I hope my sons are not kept from their wives like their father was kept from their mother. And it suddenly struck me the insidious nature of apartheid and what it was designed to do. It was designed to destroy families. It was designed to take fathers away from their children so that their children couldn't see how masculine men behaved and that sort of thing. And that is the insidious nature. And that's perpetuated today in that we can see 62% of our homes are fatherless. So we got boys being raised with no masculine, and by masculine, I mean, you know, we talk about toxic masculinity. Let's not confuse that with positive masculinity. And there are so many boys being raised with no role models. And that kind of perpetuates the cycle of abuse and that sort of thing. And that to me was the most insidious nature of apartheid. And it's a legacy that it's going to take a long time to destroy and to rebuild.
Thank you for that, Martin. And I think that contribution makes the point again that this is just the first of many conversations still to be had. Just reflecting on what you've just shared, it's a Pandora's box of the multiplicity of identities that are imposed on us, the traumatic history on multiple layers in various different racial groups, in different groups and groupings and societies that impose identities on us. And, you know, as you were speaking and you're sharing, and also Jeff was sharing about we as men and having an inability to tap into or to tap in with ease into our emotional space. I was just thinking about the expression in isiXhosa that says, indoda ayikhali, men do not cry. And if you think about a lot of these different pressures when we are speaking about creating safe spaces, how then is a man who does not cry go and seek out help in a community space that's created and known for you know, fielding men who are dealing with different challenges? And to you, Ndate Saki, you are working in communities and you are having spaces, but not only for men and the challenges that we are facing, but in this whole spectrum of the gender spectrum and along with the identities that societies imposed on us, you are dealing with work in the LGBTQI community. And coming from a question that is being posed by Tracy Lee, she is speaking to the importance that in this conversation around male suicide, that we hold a space for inclusive, open, and candid conversations about the gender identities as well. How does that show up in your environment, that Desaki? Is that something that you could just shed some light on?
Thank you, Luvuyo. This is a very serious challenge in the community of LGBTI, because where I'm working, we have accepted this community. We took a decision as an organization to say we are fathers. And biologically, it is through our seed that these children are born. But we, as the same fathers, we are the ones who reject these children, who reject this community. So we as an organization, we decided to integrate LGBTI community into our space. With partnership with social justice, we managed to create a forum for parents of LGBT community, so that we can teach these parents that they must accept and not reject these children or this community. And we have also absorbed the organizations of LGBTI into our organizations, where we've got a specific program also to go with us to teach parents, and mostly the fathers, because we fathers, we are the ones who bring this trauma into this community. Because most of them, because of the challenges they're having from their families, they've committed suicide. And at the same note, that's where now we see also the community is creating crime against this community. Because hate crime now, it happens where they are killed by the community and mostly by us men, meaning that the boys. Young men are the ones who are fighting this community, who are making sure that they don't exist in their space. Because gender-based violence is a challenge, not only based on racial issues of sexuality or other forms of gender that are there in the community. But it is also important that we should acknowledge that LGBTI, it's a challenge to some of us as men, because not understanding our identity as men, it's critical that we should know that we cannot exempt ourselves from what is happening in the LGBTI community, because they are our children. And I think on this note, I just want to say it is very important that also I'm a reverend, and I don't think my religion or my belief, it must be something that I must use as an antidote to discriminate this community. I believe they exist as far as I exist as a human being, and we need to respect them. Because values are not emotional, are not physical. Values are about emotion. It's not about peer pressure, it's not about the mob psychology, but values are those things which are so spiritual. Values is respect, trust, love, accountability, relationship. Those are the ones that must make us and influence us to appreciate and to accept this community. So in the end, we need to create space also for them. That's why we have started to do that. We have accommodated them. They are part of us. We work with them, and we make sure that the community accepts them. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Sake. And I'd like to bring in Lloyd to touch on a component of Laura's question. The question in its entirety is, how do we show up and create safe spaces for men who are willing and who do desire to explore their trauma without any implication of weakness and judgment? Otherwise, suicide will remain an option. And I do know that Dr. Sake's response did touch a bit on this, but I think from some of your intro, Lloyd, you spoke about coming into environments where the titles are, the driving force of the conversation, but we're now bringing this into the personal environment and saying everything that you're carrying, you have this initiative in the community, it's accessible, you get the information from this conversation. How then do we as well show up to support those who raise their hand, ask for help, and are looking for the support that they need to overcome the challenges that they're facing?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I think at some point we could have diverted some of the things that you're talking about, and I think the topic therefore is about the suicide, and of course you bring about the issue of trauma and in men. So I want to move a little bit from external forces into the internal force, and which is the major thing why men commit suicide. In answering to that, I'm going to answer to that how can we get healing or help for those men who are willing. Everything goes to the issue of they commit suicide because you are in pain. Most of the time it's pain. Things like depression, anxiety, and all other stress and the pressure that we're talking about that comes from the community. All those things, they are not the causes of why men commit suicide. They are just contribution towards that. The main cause for men to commit suicide is an issue of perception. It's I can have pressure from the community and become an image and become a very successful leader. But the other neighbor can have a pressure community and then commit suicide. We have the same, we are in the same room, but under the same, intensive pressure, but how we respond to the pressure that we are facing, it's what is important. Because now, the whole thing lies with the issue of how do we perceive what we see. So people, the main cause of the suicide that is taking place in our communities, there's many that have been raised, but all point out and narrow down to the issue of perception. How do you perceive what you see? If I perceive, therefore, more negatives in my life than like if I look at a situation and then instead of me being in a situation where I'm able to balance and I perceive, causing too much pain, then obviously because I perceive it to be causing too much pain, therefore they will reach to the point where I might not be able to handle what I'm going through. So therefore, I perceive like my life is useless, it's purposeless, and all that. For example, I had the issue of trauma that was talked about by Martin Big Raised. I want to bring about the issue of, are you aware that at the same time, Oprah Winfrey also went through the same trauma, but she rose and used what she has and become one of the successful women on the planet. But you have the same situation, same things that they went through. But now, coming to men, we do have men who perceive the situation. The major way on how to overcome that, win over that, and heal towards that, it's an issue then of changing the perception. It's an issue of man needs to go for counseling, man needs to go for different workshops. I'm going to be frank with you on this one. There's a thing that I had to move away from certain convention way of doing things, because I've met different men from throughout the world. The reason why sometimes they don't want to participate more into counseling and so forth and on, it's because at the end of the day, they remain victims. And it breeds about the victim mentality. For example, you go to the psychologist and they always make you weaker and weak. And then you meet with other, it's okay sometimes, but to me, it's not really okay, because now I'm meeting other people who went through the same trauma in different backgrounds. They've made through different kinds of things. When they meet, instead of becoming to overcome what I'm going through, I become more victim, because I'm now seeing other people that went through. And then when we meet, instead of talking about how can we overcome and win, we always fall on the negative side of thinking that we cannot do it, we are this and that. But normally what I do personally in terms of human behavior, I have to say to you, for example, you're a man, okay, you went through what you went through. That was bad. I don't encourage for you to go through, but it happened. That's what happened. So now let's look now on the other side, because if you're continuously looking at one side on how bad something is, I'm going to continuously make you more weaker. You're going to be weak. So you're going to become more of a victim, and then instead of overcoming that, you're going to be stuck in life. There are many men that are stuck in life. They can't move forward because they believe they're too weak. They believe that my father, if he was here, if I was not raped, if this trauma didn't happen to me, I could have been better. But now, here's the thing. We want to move forward. Love looks forward. Hate looks backward. So now let's move forward. So now, then I will say to you, let's look at it this way. What is the good thing about it? It have happened, yes, but what happened? Because some of you now know, out of that, we are hearing Martin. He talks about this is what happened to him when he was young. Out of that, something that have happened in his life, there comes a birth, a calling, a purpose that now is teaching man in terms of what he went through. So a calling was birthed out of that. So not everything in life, things are balanced. Universe, if you look at the universe, things work on the support and challenge. Things works on pain and pleasure. Things works on the both sides. So there are things that have happened. The moment somebody look at something and think that whatever happened to you, it does not have the positivity side of it. That is the moment when someone commits suicide. Because that's why I want to bring about it. Suicide is not for the people that are rich or poor, because you can have somebody rich commit suicide, a poor person commit suicide. So it's got nothing to do with money, it's got nothing to do with it, it's got everything to do with the perception. So in order for somebody to heal from that, we need to change perceptions. And I want you to bear this in mind. I'm going to mention 3 things that are very important. A person is in charge of 3 things. You are in charge of your perception, you are in charge of your choices, and you're in charge of your decision. So if you were to now, because remember, perception filters what you want to see. So in order for men to heal from all those traumas and so forth, that means we need to change our educational structure and system. And then sometimes it's a stigma. When somebody, yesterday I was talking to a colleague and he says, this guy is going for counseling. And it's like, no, I can't go for counseling. I understand, therefore, the reason why he was saying that. It's because it was mentioned counseling, and counseling is associated with something that men don't do, which is something that have already been said here on the group. So we need to change the way how you have used the word like initiatives, or use the word like wellness. We've used the words like something that is different, that is not a session, something that where man feels comfortable to go to. So everything comes from the inside. Everything, when it comes, because we're in the community, they might play that role of trying to put pressure, but at the end of the day, some things that are coming from the inside, which are causing men to commit suicide. Thank you.
Thank you for that very layered contribution. And if I was to just reflect on your sharing, you speak to the importance of the language and the use of it. You speak to the importance of engaging to understand, so you can shift perspective of the individual, and most importantly, the perception. You touched on the 3 components, which is you're in charge of your perception, the decision you make, and what was the last one? If you can just remind me, please.
The choices.
Yes. So you said it's the perception, the decision you make, which would be the choices. What was the third?
No, it's perception and then choices. Remember, choices is something that you have, and the decision that you're going to make of those choices. You have a choice.
Okay.
Then you need to make a decision out of the choices that you have.
Okay. So I think with those tools, and if I can throw that to you, Errol, as a person that deals primarily with young people in the environments that you work in, what other tools then could you possibly then put on the table that could be beneficial to some of the people that are listening on the Facebook Live, or just sharing amongst us? Just to add to that arsenal.
Thanks. I think there's so many things I'm making notes, but let me direct it to you as a start. I think my eldest daughter is the one that always keeps me on my toes. And at a point in time, she cautioned me. And again, it's something I want to put out there to this team and those that are listening. She cautioned me that I often get involved in people that are already at risk. And she said she's probably one of those kids that are 5 minutes away from becoming an addict, because she looks like she's fine. She's trying her best to get through university, through school, coping with life. And I think my answer to that has always been is we need to weave it into everything. It can't be an isolated standalone program. It needs to be part of in my world, it needs to be part of a program of engaging the world of work. It needs to be part of our school programs, but really not because we can't be waiting for that individual to show up and tell us that they are in trouble, because as I think a couple of people have mentioned, some of those individuals do not know even that they are at risk and that they are moving in that direction. So I think we need to make this healing that we're talking about. And I love the way that Rev spoke about it. Is our first response should always be this love, should always be this response, because I think Jeff spoke about it earlier, and I think the important thing, there was a question, but we need to destigmatize mental wellness before we can talk about men. And yes, it's important because we understand what is happening here, but overall, there's a risk if you talk about well-being, mental wellness in a schooling environment with the whole population. People shun away from it because there's a stigma against it. So we need to destigmatize that. I think so it's a system in those layers. We need to move away from it. And when it comes to men, I think there's this vicious thing that we've done to men, because there's this thing that we've done societally, and even we've taken it upon ourselves. There's this desire to have certainty in life, that everything should have an answer. 1 + 1, we get it in school, we get it in society. We see there must be some certainty. You even now have an app that tells you what the weather should be tomorrow, because you want that certainty. And we've made men accountable for it. And we've taken up that role. We've taken up that role to bring that certainty, to bring the bacon home. So that's all this pressure. And I think it's this thing that when we find it difficult, is there's no place to normalize it. So I love the work that Martin and Rev and Lloyd and NWI is doing, because we first need to say it's okay to have a tough day. It's okay not to have the answer. It's okay not to know if it will work out, because I think this is what we try to exude, because this is what we take into these communities. And I think it is a vicious thing that we do to ourselves as men, but also to other men. And then we run the risk of trying to want to be right. And then we stigmatize LGBT because it is wrong or it is right. We don't look at the human being behind that, because our first response should be to care, to love, because that's our obligation. And it comes to the work that Jeff loves, and I do too, from Brene Brown, that talks about this vulnerabilities. How do we show up in this vulnerability? Because even in Christianity, there's a guy, Father Roy, that speaks about this specifically, and he says, we've created, even in Christianity, we've taken God to an almighty God, but not the one that is vulnerable, that gave himself, So even in men, so the archetype of men is the strong, the one that is the almighty, that knows everything, as opposed to the man that I need to be, is to be vulnerable, is to be able to show up with care, with love, firstly, before I can be, this guy that knows everything. So I've said a lot, but I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you. I think that's a very helpful contribution to the conversation. I don't know if I can open it up to the floor. There is one question, and this I'll pose to the floor, and whoever would like to take it can please go ahead. It's from Kim, and it's more of an exchange, interestingly, on the Facebook Live, but I think it's an important component for us to bring into this conversation, which is to say, in the experience of the panel, a question that comes up is what form of healing modalities are the most effective for men? So I think we've touched on it in some of our contributions, but it may be a worthwhile opportunity to address quite pointedly. What has been for you as a man, a healing modality that's worked for you that maybe would be worth sharing during this conversation for people who are listening in to say, that might also work. And this I'm throwing to the floor, so anyone is welcome to.
Jeff.
Go for it, Martin. No, you go for it.
Okay, we'll be nice and nobody will talk. Yeah, for me, it's a case of my life changed for the better when I saw a program. Somebody brought up, Lloyd, you brought up Oprah Winfrey, right? So she had a show on called The 200 Men, which was set up by Tyler Perry. And in that show, they had 200 men in the studio, and these 200 men were victims of sexual abuse and rape. And it was hearing their stories and them making themselves vulnerable that allowed me to start my healing journey, because I was no longer alone. And for me, it's been a case of creating an environment or a place where men can just speak freely about what happened to them, where men can come in. We opened a center last year, I think it was in June, and we managed to keep the center running until about April this year. And then we just couldn't get funding, so we closed it down. But in that time, I got so many men came into the center just to talk about their marriage. They just needed a place where they could go in and say, I'm struggling with XYZ. What do you guys think? A place where they could just be vulnerable, a place that was safe for them just to be able to know where they could walk in there and just ask the most ridiculous of questions, and somebody would honestly stand up and say, you know what, I've been through that too. And I found I did XYZ, it worked for me, that sort of stuff. Instead of, if we look at addiction, I mean, the majority of addicts are men. But when you go to the healing spaces that are created for addiction, it's a mixed bag. And it's not allowing people to open up. A man in front of a woman is never going to be honest. He's never going to say, listen, actually, I started using drugs because I was raped as a 7-year-old boy. Actually, I started using drugs because my father used to beat the bejeebies out of me. They're not going to be that open and honest. So for us, it was a case of creating a safe space where these guys could come in and just talk about anything. They knew there wasn't going to be any pressure on them, to conform to any gender ideal or any gender norm or anything like that. They could just come in and man to man say, listen, this is what I'm going through. I need help. And you'd be amazed at how many men sat in front of me and just opened up. And how they opened up was incredible. And I kind of looked at it and thought, if we could do this in every major center in South Africa, we would truly start turning the tide. So that for me, the best modality for healing, definitely just safe spaces and groups. Somebody said to me the other day, says, why don't we just open up like a room where you can come and have coffee and play snooker and just chat to other guys, and that's the sort of thing we need to be looking at. Just they can come in, they can talk if they want to, they don't have to if they don't want to. They can come back again next week until they build the courage up to say, hey, you know what, I want to talk to somebody about something that happened to me, and then start chatting about it. That's for me. So Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. I'm just picking up a note that Laura's placed on Facebook. Men will generally take lead from men. So we need more men to step up to assist men. And I think that's absolutely fundamental. And so what we're trying to do in the Mental Wellness Initiative, obviously, there's an initial response to challenges that we face in society. But the longer term shift in the system is ultimately where we want to go. Conversations such as these, where men talk about issues affecting men, are a great example. The work that Reverend Saki is doing in his community, where he's bringing folk together. I think it's Lane Benjamin that did an exercise in Hanover Park, one of the communities here down the road from us in Cape Town, where she pulled together women from the community to become trauma-informed counselors, ordinary people, not people with qualifications or anything like that. And she discovered that it's the connection, it's the community, it's being able to talk to other people about the challenges that we're going through. So it's sharing your stories, allowing people to tell their stories, and telling their stories without any judgment about it. And so the work that Reverend Saki is doing and other people are doing, bringing men together to talk about issues relating to men, is where we have to go if we're going to shift the system ultimately. So thanks for this opportunity to be part of this conversation. I think is a step in the right direction. It's exactly part of the healing modality. And the more we can do this, the more men will recognize that what they're facing is not unique. They're not on their own. Other people are going through similar experiences.
Just to add a point, Jeff.
Thank you.
If you don't
Sorry,
mind,
Martin.
I just want to add to your point there. It's men leading men in this healing. You know, we're finding with masculinity, there's this thing that's happened with masculinity. It's almost been cast as if it's a bad thing. And I love a friend of mine, Craig Wilkinson, runs an organization called Father and Nation. And he keeps saying, we don't need less masculinity. We need more positive masculinity. We need those men that protect. We need those men that nurture. We need those men that provide. We need those men that defend, you know, that sort of thing. Use their voices for good, use their strength for good. And that is what masculinity is. But what we have on the flip side of it is we have like a movement that is trying to redefine masculinity. Masculinity doesn't need redefinition. What we need to do is cut out the toxic parts of it and, like a cancer, get rid of them and kind of encourage the positivity of masculinity. And what we don't need at this point in time is unfortunately, the female do tend to lead these things, but what we don't need is women standing up and saying, this is what we think masculinity should be, because automatically men are going to take the, oh, you're just trying to change us, you're just trying to make us more feminine, and, you know, that sort of stuff. So yeah, we need more men to be vulnerable, more men to stand up and talk about the positive traits of masculinity and encourage them. And it's happening to a large extent. You know, I mean, we have a lot of like the Character Company that kind of nurtures and mentors boys. Father and Nation that's going into Alex, and they're talking to men about GBV and getting men to talk to other men about not committing these crimes. You know, so there's a lot of good that's beginning to happen. There's a lot of men there, but not enough. We need a few million more.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Martin. I'd like to invite Errol for any contributions around the safe space and modalities, and then we'll follow with Lloyd, then Rev. And I know that we would have gone a bit over the time, but I'd then like to invite, once Rev is done with his contributions, the panelists just to give their closing remarks and thank yous.
Thanks. I think it is creating those spaces, and I think I concur with what everyone said. And I like the positioning of what Jeff is saying, is that it's allowing to tell those stories. And I think within telling those stories is really to find a way of owning your discomforts, because I think that's challenge lies. The stories are easy because men can tell stories. You know, they stand for hours around a braai and they tell stories, but they avoid those areas of discomfort. And I think that's what we need to change, is to be able to sit with that discomfort and be able to work through it. And I think it's creating platforms that challenges that discomfort, uncomfortable conversations that we need to have. Conversations, I think we're good at, you know, so we do it. But we soon, I'm the youngest of others, you know, we have a lot of conversations, but those uncomfortable ones, you know, are very lived, and it's easily, you know, circumvented and overthrown by something that is just a bit lighter because it's too heavy. So I think what I would like to contribute is that we need to find ways of bringing those difficult conversations into play when we're having those spaces of conversation. Is this our final remark? Are we done?
No, not yet. It will be Lloyd, then Rev Saki, and then we'll do the round of final remarks and things.
Thanks. And I'm fine.
Lloyd, anything that you'd like to add to that from a modalities perspective?
Yes, thank you. I actually totally agree with everyone that have said right now. I think that's what we need. We need to start by ourselves, because I also had to learn how to let go and be willing to talk about my failures, to talk about my fears, and also to talk about what I'm feeling, and then be okay about it. So in trying to create the space, I think they're doing well, but however, we need to do more. We need to engage more. It shouldn't be something that will end here in this conversation, but we need to take it further. We need to have more of the sessions. We need also to create networks whereby we are deliberate in what we are doing. We need to go out there within our different spaces and in our places of influence, and be in a position to be freely talking about it without mentioning what you do, just like what you once said. Don't, the moment you say to somebody you are either a psychologist or counseling and all that, immediately they will shift into the defense mechanism. But if you are there to just participate and engage with the conversation, whatever that is happening there, if it is not the right time to talk about it, don't talk about whatever that is there, so that men can feel comfortable. You've mentioned the issue of, like, at the braai, men avoid that. Yes, they do avoid it because no one is willing to be vulnerable. So we need to be more in terms of education. We need to be more, it's like educating a man without telling him that I'm educating you. Or it's like, telling a person, counseling a man without telling that I'm counseling you. Just to remove this thing and be talking about it, because the more you talk about yourself, the moment someone wants to also talk about themselves. So if you're going out with a mindset of trying to, teach somebody, it's not going to work. But if you go out there and be willing to say, I want you to see me from the inside, to be transparent, so that you can see what kind of a person I am, and then to identify with other men, it's going to be easy. In that way, you'll be able to save a lot of men from such kind. So I think, I just want to say what Dr. Saki talked about, the men and what in the community that they're doing. I think it's quite important because, having a background of the church myself, I've noticed also a lot of judgments coming from church, and in different sectors. We do have it in different religions. It's there. There are those who are considered more spiritual and those who are not considered more spiritual and all that. But if you can try to speak from a perspective where we know that we are human beings, not what we do and where we are participating from, and engage as men and be willing to say, okay, even though I'm a leader, but you're willing to come down and serve and be like everybody else, and be willing to open up your life, admitting where you make a mistake, and also tell, no, I did make a mistake, not to hide your mistakes, not to hide your weakness, but be willing to be able to share, so that people can, other men can be able to identify certain things. What I normally do personally, if I'm talking to men and all that, if they mention certain things and they're shy and all that, I always tell them where I did the same thing. I was like, no, this is what I did, and you did it better. Because in myself, I did the same thing, but I did it even worse. So, but I didn't actually hold on to it. I moved forward. So in that way, I'm like, are you serious? I'm like, yes, that's what I did. So it's an element of identifying. In that way, that person will become more free, more want to see you more open in all that. And even when they become open, don't be in a position to judge. Don't do that. Because one day, it is not necessarily that you are above them. It's just an issue that one day you might also find yourself in the same situation. And that person might be also saving you at some point. So it's an element of working together, and to build more of that's the way how we can create a space. So we need to do more sessions and more of engaging and networking, and be open, be willing to engage other people without a title, without saying what you do, because reserve for what you do for that moment. It's not sometimes it's not required. It's just a matter of trying for you to say something that will help somebody. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lloyd. Ndatasaki. And if I can invite my fellow panelists to turn off their cameras just to assist with Ndatasaki's bandwidth while he shares this comment. Ndatasaki, if you can please try to turn your camera on just so that the participants get to at least see you once more.
Hello? Hello?
Perfect, please go ahead.
Yeah. I about conversation.
Sorry, Tata. Sorry, Tata. Your connection is really not doing us any favors. Maybe, unfortunately, I'm just going to ask for you to turn your camera off again, just so that you can give the remarks. Sorry about that. So if you can, if you can continue, Tata.
Yeah, yes, I'm happy about what the conversation today that we did, and I think there are two issues that I want must take it as a way forward. The one that Mr. Pillay said about the stories. We need to allow men to tell stories, and that will influence men to come forward and share their challenges, especially traumatic challenges, which are there, that makes them not to stand up and share their insight or spiritual challenges they're having. So the next point is, I think the way forward, we really have to come together, either as organizations or private sector of institutions, and to drive this issue of mental health, knowing that we've got programs that we have integrated as united, not as as our organization, Bana Bakai alone, but coming together and make sure that we advocate. And what Doctor said also there about uniting and using education as a tool so that people can be aware about the situation. So I just want to say thank you for giving us this opportunity, and please let it continue. Even if it's not us, the panels, but let us continue with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ndatasaki. We'll also take that as your closing remark. I see you've already put that into these comments. If I may ask, as I work back around in the group, that we keep it to 2 short sentences at most, 3 if we're stretching it, just if we can have our closing remarks of the conversation today and possible way forward. Lloyd, I'll...
All right, thank you so much for this conversation that we're having today. I really appreciate for the time given, and I hope that we have more of this, and hope that it's not the end, but we are going to continuously have more and other more initiatives that can come through. So thank you very much for the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Lloyd. Martin, over to you.
Yeah, great space. Nice discussion. And like I say, I mean, if we had more men standing up and showing vulnerability and being honest and open about their pains and their feelings, we would probably have a lot more men coming out and talking about these things before they take that final step and end their lives. You know, we need these spaces, these safe spaces, and I encourage people in churches to do work like Reverend Saki is doing, you know, to be that place where men can come in and open up and be honest about what's actually happening in their lives. And instead of saying, how are you? No, I'm fine. Say, no, really, how are you? Ask a friend, really ask a friend how they're doing, and you'll be surprised at how many people are actually struggling.
Thank you very much, Martin. Jeff, over to you.
Yeah, so I want to just pick up the point that Martin has made. But Errol, I think, mentioned the fact that I enjoy Brené Brown's work, and I think she speaks about the curse of perfection. And if there's one thought I want to leave, that we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to have all the answers as men. So embrace vulnerability. And today's conversation was a starting point for us, really, to start talking about the things that matter to us. When a young man ends his life, that's serious, that's tragic. These are the things that matter, not whether the Springboks are winning or losing or whatever the case may be. So let's get into deeper conversations around the braai. Errol, someone mentioned that we take these conversations to spaces where men are gathering, into taverns. I think it's a great idea, so that we start popularizing the message that it's okay for us to own our vulnerability. Thanks very much for inviting me to be part of this conversation.
Thank you, Jeff. Errol, over to you.
Thank you, Luvuyo. Thank you, MWI, for really holding this space. I think it's a very, very important conversation, and as everyone has shared, I hope that it's not the last. I hope that there can be many more of these. I think it is an important, even for me sitting in it, there's a lot of stuff that I need to understand more of and deal with, just looking at my own history and my heritage. Martin mentioned about colored communities or colored individuals not being so represented in his, and I'm still grappling with that, Martin, and I'll try when we connect one day, God willing, I'll be able, well, hopefully I'll share with you what my thoughts are. But I think for me, just important reflecting on today, Luvuyo, is when we think it's not at a point of concern, we can only reflect on the communities we see around us and how it shows up in how it is if I look at my community where I grew up in, broken families, broken society, young people, unemployment rate, teenage pregnancies, drug abuse, alcohol abuse. The fact is, if we don't address it, it's systemic. It has got such a great ripple effect. So I think if we believe that I am not affected, I believe we are mistaken. And it's such an important thing to converse about, but also to take action on. So I hope that there will be more of these that will lead into action. So thank you very much. Thank you to the other panelists. I've learned so much. There's been a great afternoon spent. Thank you for allowing this space.
Thank you, Errol. And mine is to thank each of the panelists for bringing yourselves to this conversation and for the very meaningful contributions, perspectives shared, experiences, tools, modalities, and just openly and honestly this Friday afternoon joining in this conversation in the kind of way that we hope that very many more men can engage, reach out to one another, and hopefully overcome the challenges by just sharing that, listen, things aren't necessarily going well, but listen, I need help. And in the space of needing help, the team has shown on the slide suicide helplines. And just if you can take those details, it may not be for yourself, but it may be for someone that you think is doing all well and good, but may actually benefit a great deal from the numbers. So having information like this readily available and maybe sharing it openly on the family groups that we're on, and the very many platforms that we, like Jeff said, will exchange the different scores of the sporting teams, but shy away from the important conversations like the one this afternoon that was brought to us by the Mental Wellness Initiative in proud partnership with the Ford Foundation. And as per the comments that are being shared during the chat group, the chat interface, and also on Facebook Live, this is the first of many more conversations around the topic of Indoda, the work that we're dealing with, the spaces that we're confronted with, and hopefully, as many people have asked, we can delve deeper into the topics of should, sadly, a suicide happen, then what? What do we do to pick ourselves and our families up and deal with the tragedy that would have befallen us. So I think there's great contributions from the chats, and people are eager for this conversation to continue on a more consistent basis. But we invite the MWI team, as per the response from today's engagements, to see how more frequently we can have these conversations. So please do look out for their platforms to get more understanding on when this next conversation can take place. So thank you very much for spending a little bit over than this hour and a half with us on a Friday afternoon. We hope that there's something that you've taken away from today's conversation. By no means do we claim that this conversation answered all the problems, but as people have shared, this is merely scratching the surface, and hopefully it can help someone or trigger something in your awareness that leads to a follow-up conversation, like Martin said, not just to say, hey, how you doing, but how are you really doing, and what is really going on in your life? You're not showing up the same way, you're not laughing as much, and I'm just using basic examples, not necessarily saying that that's the entry point to the conversations. So let's check in with each other, let's take care of one another, and let's remind one another that even when it's not working out, it is honestly not the end of the world. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we look forward to continuing this conversation one day.
Final comment from me, Luvuyo, to say thanks to you for chairing our session so excellently today. Well done. Great facilitation. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks,
welcome,
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
We'll see you soon.
Thank
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys. See you again.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.